As I mentioned last week, we are going to continue talking about drinking as far as is presented in the Bible. We talked about last time about drunkenness and how it obviously was stated in the scriptures that it was not acceptable. We also talked a little bit about why various types of alcoholic beverages, what it is about alcohol that causes all the problems that people face. So what we're going to do today is to go through some of the words that are talked about in the Old Testament. One of the difficulties we have is people look at the Old Testament and the New Testament and read through the Bible, and when we talk about the dangers that with alcohol and alcoholic beverages, a lot of people go, well, wait a minute, they drank in the Old Testament times. They drank in biblical times. And one way to look at this is say, yeah, all people drink. But it does make a difference what they drink. See, the greatest difficulty that we have is getting a definition that's not biased in our scriptures. For numerous years, and you'll see why as we go through some of the words here this morning, for numerous years people have basically translated a lot of words that are in the Old Testament especially, all to the word wine, regardless as to how it's used. And part of it is based on, at least most I can tell, is we got people that basically are involved in translating has a strong bias towards justifying alcoholic drink. And instead of relying on works of men or grabbing Bible dictionaries and saying, okay, here's what this word means, we're going to do it a very simple way. We're just going to take the scriptures and let the scriptures define it. We're going to look and see how these words are being used. And I think you'll understand from that. In order to keep this straight, because there are a lot of words involved, got your charts so that we can keep it track of it. What we're going to do is look at various words. And the very first word we're going to look at, get this up here, is the word yayin, which is up here in the pink here. Yayin is a generic term to identify basically all the juice of grapes, fresh, fermented, or anything in between. If it's made from grape juice in some form or fashion, then it's yayin. That word is used 144 times in the Old Testament. And just to show that it has different definitions, we're going to start out in Nehemiah. I have to get my chart to move over a little bit. Nehemiah is not on this chart, but that's the one we're going to start with. Nehemiah chapter 5, verse 18. Take your Bibles and turn to Nehemiah chapter 5. And in verse 18, it says, "Now that which was prepared for each day was 1 ox and 6 choice sheep. Also birds were prepared for me. And once in 10 days all sorts of wine were furnished in abundance. Yet for all this I did not demand the governor's food allowance, because of the servitude was heavy upon this people." Nehemiah is listing out what he was given since he was ruling and taking care of the place, what food he was given. But I want you to notice that it says there was all kinds of wine. Okay. This is a hint. Yeah, and the word there is yayin. Yayin stands for all sorts, different types of products. That's translated here as wine. So let's start out with over in Isaiah chapter 16 to see how it's used. Isaiah chapter 16 and in verse 10. It says, and gladness and joy are taken away from the fruitful field. And in the vineyards also there will be no cries of joy or jubilant shouting. No treader treads out the wine in the presses, for I have made the shouting to cease. Now I want you to think about it. If the word there means an alcoholic drink, how do you have alcoholic drinks in the presses? Doesn't work that way, does it? Obviously, that word there is referring to grapes, because you put grapes in the presses. In fact, he was mentioning there wasn't even any treaders yet to tread out the grapes to get the juice out of it. So, one way yayin is used is when there's juice still in the clusters, or when it's very recently squeezed out. While it's still in, you got a grape and it's still got the juice inside the grape, that's yayin. That's one definition. That's one way it's used. Another one to confirm that, let's go over to Deuteronomy chapter 28. Deuteronomy chapter 28. And in verse 39, it says, you plant and cultivate vineyards, and you shall neither drink of the wine nor gather the grapes, for the worm shall devour them. Now he's talking about you don't gather the wine. Okay, don't gather the grapes or the wine because the worms eat it. He's basically saying you're not going to be able to harvest any of your crop because the worms are going to get to the crop before you can get to them. But notice he's talking about the juice that's still in the grapes. It can also be used for fresh or unfermented juice. Take a look at Jeremiah chapter 48. Jeremiah chapter 48. My Bible go the right way. Jeremiah 48 and verse 33. It says, so gladness and joy are taken away from the fruitful field, even from the land of Moab. And I made the wine to cease from the wine presses. No one will tread them with shouting, and with the shouting there will not be shouts of joy. Here it talks about the wine flowing from the presses. Well, you don't just tread grapes and get alcoholic beverages. Now, what comes out of the wine presses is what we normally would call grape juice. And so yayin here is referring to grape juice. There is also another product that's made out of grapes that a lot of people don't pay attention to, that was very well known in the Old Testament days. And that was where they would take the grapes, the juice, and boil it down. We still do that. We call it maple syrup. If you ever seen maple sap, it's very, very liquidy. But we boil it down into a thick sugar. They did that with grape juice. They would take the grape juice, boil it down until it became a thick syrup. You had to be very careful with it. If it got too hot, it would scorch and it would taste awful. But if you did it just right, you could get a thick, consistent syrup, kind of like honey in consistency, which then you could reconstitute it. So yes, they had Kool-Aid before they had Kool-Aid. Okay. Instead of a dried powder, they did it down to a thick syrup, and then you reconstitute it to get a drink. In Proverbs chapter 9, we'll talk about that sobe a little bit later, but yayin's used for that. Proverbs chapter 9, and in verse 2, it says, she set out her maidens, she calls from the tops of the heights. Oops, I read verse 3. Verse 3, talking about wisdom, she says, she prepared her food, she has mixed her wine, she has also set her table. And when it says mixed wine in that case, what it's referring to is she's taken the syrup, she's reconstituted back to something as drinkable. And back in verse 5, same thing. It says, "Come, eat my food, drink of the wine I have mixed." Now, the reason why they boiled it down to a syrup was because it did not ferment. If you get too much sugar in something, it doesn't spoil. That's why you can keep honey out and it doesn't spoil that easily, because it's got too much sugar content in it. And this was one of the ways they preserved and flavored their drinks, but just by boiling it down to syrup. Yains also, though, use of alcoholic beverages. Take a look at Proverbs 20. Proverbs 20, verse 1, it says, "Wine is a mocker, and strong drink a brawler, and whoever is intoxicated by it is not wise." You cannot get intoxicated by grape juice. Okay, so it's not talking about the stuff that comes fresh from the vat, because he's saying whoever is intoxicated is not wise. Okay, so obviously here it's being used for an intoxicating type of drink. Then another place where yain's used is in Proverbs 23. Here it's using in a different sense. It's again translated as mixed wine, but it's being used in a different sense. In Proverbs 23 and verse 30, it says, "Those who linger over wine, those who go to taste mixed wine." And he's talking about drunkenness. Sorbet, which is the syrup, doesn't have alcohol. It doesn't cause any problems. But there's another type of mixed wine that they knew back then, is because when you had alcoholic beverages and you add herbs to it, alcohol extracts chemicals out of the leaves. You don't ever remember your science projects back in high school when you took a green leaf and you put it in some alcohol and got the green out of it.